Today, we will be breaking down history's worst methods of torture. We'll start with the milder forms of torture and make our way to the most brutal forms imaginable. We will be excluding any of Beyonce's country music from today's list. First up, rat torture. Rat torture begins with the victim lying down on a table and being tied up. A rat is then placed on the victim's body. Technically, the rat can be placed anywhere, but I'm sure you can imagine the places that you'd least want a rat to be in. The rat is then covered by some form of bowl. Torturers often opted to use metal cages to allow the victim to get a detailed view of the abomination taking place. Heat is then applied to the bowl, causing the rat to burrow into the victim. The rat would continue to burrow to escape the heat, only to realize that living inside a human is no place for a rat to be. It would then burrow further to escape the inside of the human. All the while, the victim is forced to lie there and hope the rat doesn't take a turn down Major Vital Organ Street. You may be thinking to yourself, this is clearly a long retired form of torture used by a less civilized society. And you'd be completely wrong. Less than 50 years ago, this form of torture was used in Latin America. This scumbag right here, Augusto Pinochet, was a pioneer of human rights violations. These violations included rat torture. His regime had a preferred method of rat torture that often included less than favorable entry points. Next up on our list is the Iron Maiden. Considered to be the flagship when looking at medieval torture devices, the Iron Maiden leads the charge in psychologically horrifying torture equipment. It is a coffin-shaped device that is lined with sharp spikes throughout its interior. Its victims would be placed inside and the doors to the device would be shut. However, death in this device is slow. Spikes within the Iron Maiden were placed in a manner that avoids vital organs, leading to numerous non-lethal puncture wounds. The cause of death in this device would most often be blood loss, but only after the doors were opened, which allowed the wounds to bleed. If the device is made correctly, then theoretically the victims of the Iron Maiden could be left inside for hours, if not days, waiting for the moment that the doors open, allowing their wounds to bleed. Next up on the list, we have the rack. In 1605, a man by the name of Guy Fawkes, along with a handful of his fellow plotters, attempted to blow up the English Parliament to assassinate King James and restore the Catholic monarchy. Unfortunately for him, his plan was foiled, and he quickly became the most infamous example of how cruel the rack can be. The rack is a device that consists of a place to lie down and a gearbox either on top or on the bottom. Guy Fawkes was a flawless demonstration of its effectiveness. As the gears were cranked, his tied-down body was stretched further and further. First, he experienced body-wide dislocation, but as the torture continued, ligaments and tendons began to snap. The rack's damage is so severe, it would often leave its victims paralyzed for the rest of their lives. Guy Fawkes was so badly injured that after his torture was over, the signature on his confession wasn't anything more than a handful of scribbles. Some even say his confession was a major stretch of the truth. Next on our list, we have the breaking wheel. Much like the name implies, it is a wheel simply designed to break its victims. A victim would be tied to the large wooden wheel and their appendages would be broken, often to be woven into the spokes of the wheel. On some occasions, the wheel would be rolled down a large hill or pushed around the town, prolonging the experience. Victims of the breaking wheel would be left on the wheel to deter other criminals from making the same mistake. One such criminal was Peter Niers. When discussing examples of medieval torture, I often found that seldom was the torture actually justified. Peter Niers was an exception to this. He allegedly murdered over 500 people, including killing babies and eating his victims. Additionally, he was practicing black magic. If you don't already know, one of the most surefire ways to take the room temperature challenge in medieval Europe is to be accused of performing magic or being a witch. In 1581, Niers was extensively tortured before being executed, and the wheel was a crowd favorite at the time. Using iron bars, the executioners broke his limbs and stretched him across the wheel. Ultimately, Niers would succumb to the trauma he endured and was left publicly to serve as an age-old lesson. Don't do the crime if you can't do the bludgeoning to death. Now, let's talk about white torture. This is the only modern form of torture on this list, and the most horrifying form of torture in my own personal opinion. It involves putting the prisoner in a white room in white clothes and feeding them only, you guessed it, white food. The room they are in is completely soundproof as well. What makes this torture so grueling is the limitless agony they can induce. When looking at torture that causes pain, there's always a limit. No matter the method, a human subjected to painful torture is going to reach a point in which they pass out and or die, ultimately ending the experience. Not in white torture. White torture is a seemingly endless punishment that pits you against your own mind. An honorable mention that I have chosen to include in the white torture section is Chinese water torture. It involves strapping a victim to a table and dropping water onto their forehead at a slow and unsteady rate. The continuous and constant anticipation of the next water droplet slowly causes an unimaginable level of anxiety, driving some to madness. The feeling has been described as a hammer endlessly smashing into your face. Ouch. Now we arrive at one of the most unimaginable torture methods throughout history, the brazen bull. Originated in ancient Greece, this torture method involves placing someone into a hollowed out bronze statue of a bull. A large fire would then be started under the bull. The bronze statue would gradually heat up, causing the victim inside to begin to slowly cook. Their screams and yells for mercy would only be heard as a bull's roar due to the attached horn. In a result of twisted fate, the brazen bull's first victim was its own creator, Paralos. He was a skilled bronze worker from around 570 BC and built the bull for Phalaris, a tyrant of Achragos. As any logical tyrant does when they receive a gift, he brutally slaughtered the person giving it to him. The tyrant was unimpressed with the theoretical design and ordered Paralos into the bull. A fire was started under the bull, which ended up working exactly as advertised. Now that I've introduced you to the most unimaginable ways to die, I want to ask you all to like and subscribe. These videos take a good amount of work, and I have to balance their creation while being a full-time student and a full-time worker, so any support goes a long way. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.